Well, welcome to my 7th LinkedIn Live broadcast. Today I'm speaking about a subject very close to my heart, bidding successfully to social housing organisations. So first of all, you may wonder, well, what qualifies Andrew Morrison of AM Bid to talk about bidding successfully to social housing organisations? Well, quite a number of things. First of all, I grew up in social housing, so I've actually got lived experience of social housing. I then worked for 12 years in local government in social housing. So a lot of experience in various roles there, including working at a front desk, allocating properties, also working as a community-based housing officer, working as a local housing manager, managing an antisocial behaviour team for a local authority, and also being the strategy and development manager for the City of Edinburgh Council. So lots of experience working in social housing. I then went on to spend 5 years working for a private sector property management company. All of their contracts were actually with social housing organisations working on behalf of local councils, providing temporary accommodation. So a lot of experience there dealing with people who've experienced homelessness. I served in a regional board of the Chartered Institute of Housing for 3 years. And I also served on a housing association's board as well, again for a 3-year term. I moved from a career in social housing to a career in bidding in 2005. So I've spent the last 15 years bidding, and quite a lot of the bids that I've been involved in have been to social housing organisations. So plenty of experience to draw on, and also look forward to seeing some of your comments coming up as well. That'll be great. So already I'm seeing that somebody says it's interesting that this is cropped up on their feed. So brilliant. So first of all, let's think about social housing. And it's perhaps best not to just think of it as one amorphous mass, but instead be thinking about the organisation. So is it a local authority who owns the social housing? Is it a housing association? Is it charitable housing? Is it perhaps a tenant management cooperative type of housing? So again, there are different types of organisations that own and manage social housing. It could even be properties that are in the private rented sector, but through something like private sector leasing or temporary accommodation, these properties are coming under the auspices perhaps of the local authority or housing association, and they're perhaps looking for organisations to either manage the tenancies or to manage the properties, the asset management side of things, repairs basically. So what type of organisation is it? What is the geographical spread of the organisation? So if it's a council, it's quite easy, as generally speaking, the properties will be within the council area. If it's a housing association, is it one of the smaller, perhaps community-based housing associations, or is it a large regional or even national housing association? And the contract that's coming to the market, that's being tendered, what is that for, and what properties, what residents is it going to serve? So with organisations like housing associations, some of them are general needs, so they've just got a range of properties a bit similar to the local councils, and in many cases they got their properties originally via stock transfer from local authorities. However, many housing associations also have specialist housing. They're actually meeting particular needs. So it could be meeting needs of disabled residents, it could be elderly residents, it could be sometimes these could be black-led or ethnic minority housing associations. There is a whole range there. So you'd want to be thinking about, who is the client group, who's the resident group. Even that terminology is something that comes into social housing quite a lot. So we actually have sometimes the organisations are calling the people who live in their homes, they are calling them tenants. Other times they might be calling them, the organisation might term them residents. Other ones term them customers. Years ago, they sometimes used to speak about service users, but of course we don't see that so often now. It could be that they just call them people, and you know what? That's exactly what they are. They are people like you and I who live within the properties and have similar needs. However, there may also be situations of vulnerability as well, and it could be vulnerable tenants or residents living within the properties, vulnerable client groups. There could also be a real ethnic mix. There could be lots of different languages being spoken. So all of these things to some extent would need to be addressed within your tender response as well. It's very, very important that you personalise the tender response. It's not good enough to just simply cut and paste a tender response that you did to maybe another housing association, just change the names, if you remember to change them all. That's not acceptable. It'll be very, very clear to evaluators that this bid has not been written in a tailored way to their organisation. I would suggest that you even look beyond the documents that they supply you with at tender stage. Certainly read these documents. They're the ones that the organisation feel you must read, but look further than that. Look into their website, look into their residents' newsletters, look into on the website of a housing association, it may contain the board meeting minutes. Get a feel for the organisation. And local authorities as well, they publish the committee papers, so you'll be able to find out quite a lot about what's going on within the housing department or the sections of the council that are relevant here. It may even be that you'll find a committee paper that's talking about the particular performance maybe of the current contract. It might be talking about the retendering that's going to go on. So you want to find out what you can out of that. You may find that the objectives of the retender exercise are being made very clear here. With incumbent contractors, you want to find out who's currently delivering the goods or services, how are they being perceived, what's the relationship like there as well. If you're new to the market, it's going to be a bit more difficult for you if you're new to delivering goods or services on behalf of social housing organisations. And like many organisations, they're going to want to feel that you've got relevant sectoral experience, or at least your experience is clearly transferable into this sector. And you need to be able to articulate that within your bid or tender response. Don't just expect the buyers to join the dots. They won't necessarily do that. You've got to make it clear exactly what you're going to do for this organisation. It's good if your bid responses are peppered with information that you've clearly drawn, showing that you've actually got to understand the organisation. You may be talking about the communities. Maybe you're going to be delivering asset management, repairs, service perhaps. You'd have looked into what's the situation with the estates, what's the situation with parking, etc. If you need to have a welfare van sited somewhere, or you need to have a container for materials, where are you going to do that? Who are the local community groups that are there as well? Perhaps tenants and residents associations. What is important to them? What sort of things have they been saying maybe online about the organisation and about its service delivery? You want to understand where the pain points are and perhaps show awareness of these without being critical of the organisation or its current suppliers or even its residents. But you want to make clear how the service that you're going to provide is going to address some of these pain points that the organisation has. In terms of the context, it's important that you understand that organisations that have social housing, they are strictly monitored. There's a lot of legislation that they have to comply with. They are regulated as well, so there's regulation as well. There's good practice as well. So you want to show that you understand the context. So perhaps in recent years, some of the big issues that there have been, there was obviously the introduction of universal credit, even before that, the so-called bedroom tax, and the effect that these perhaps had on things like rent collections. There's also rent freezes that have taken place. In more recent years, there's been Grenfell, and we're actually still seeing the effects of decisions that were taken by a social housing organisation coming under intense scrutiny. So nobody wants to be the organisation that has, hopefully there'll never be anything like Grenfell again, but things like that are in people's minds, and they really want to be sure that they are appointing a contractor or supplier who has got risk very firmly under control. And this is risk, obviously, to the organisation, to its residents, but also your own risks as an organisation, your own staff that are going to be delivering the service. The organisation, the buyer here, is also going to be looking at your own financial stability and resilience as well, because often the contracts that are being awarded are across multi-year. And in these multi-year contracts, if the contractor goes bust, then the social housing organisation is left picking up the problems, and often they end up having to pay quite a bit more money to get services in emergency type circumstances. So they obviously want to avoid doing that. COVID-19 is on everybody's minds as well, so it's very important that you've got COVID-19 arrangements, that you're able to work safely, you're able to work securely, and that you very much got welfare, hygiene, safety in mind, not just for your own staff, but very much for the residents within the properties that you're going to be doing work in, and also in the local communities as well, that you're working in a safe manner. Talking of communities, it's important to think local with housing. So social housing is in local communities. Often we speak about community-based housing associations. We speak about local councils. So they're going to want to see some evidence that you've got some knowledge and understanding of the local area, preferably that you've got some connection to it as well. So if you can talk about a local office, a local depot, that you've got local staff. It might be that you don't have all of these things just now, but maybe getting this contract would allow you to create local jobs or sustain local jobs, because there's perhaps the TUPE element here. There's maybe an incumbent contractor with an existing organised staff group that would actually move with the contract, that you would need to be taking these staff on board. So the housing organisation is, while they may stand at arm's length from the actual TUPE transfer, they do not want negative headlines from it. They want to make sure that you would be managing the mobilisation and implementation of the new contract in an effective way, and doing this taking into account TUPE employees, also where there's a need for consultation, perhaps with local residents groups as well. They very much want organisations that will work with them in a spirit of partnership working. But we don't want a situation of, getting the contract out, looking at all the terms, you didn't do this, and then you go back to the organisation and say, yeah, but you didn't do that. That adversarial type of relationship is toxic. We certainly wouldn't want to see it. So you'd want to be providing them with evidence that you're somebody that understands the important role that social housing has, that you've got a commitment to it, and that you're going to work with them in a spirit of partnership working. That brings me to the subject of social value. What we've seen, particularly across the last 10 years, is an increasing importance being put on social value, or community benefits, as it's called in Scotland. This is the organisation, the buyer here, saying, well, we're giving you a contract for X thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions in some cases. What are you going to give back to the local communities because you got this contract? So what immediately comes to mind, of course, is local jobs, local apprenticeships, perhaps work placements for schools or students, interactions with local colleges and universities. Are you going to be able to do some work on a pro bono basis, perhaps for local charities or local community, perhaps social enterprises? Can you do some work with them? What support are you going to provide locally? So that is of a lot of interest to social housing organisations. And what we've seen across maybe the last 10 years is at one time, social value was what was called in bidding non-scored. So you'd maybe have to write a page or a couple of pages. You'd maybe have to make some commitments, but it was non-scored. It was often, in many cases, not really properly monitored. There was some evidence that bidders were, making commitments, but then not being asked to actually stick to them. These commitments weren't being monitored. That has changed completely. So what we now see is that social value will usually have a percentage score within the quality or technical part of a bid. And it could range anywhere between 1%, very rare for it to be as low as that. It's often 5%, 10%. I've even seen 20% sometimes as well. So that's a real focus on social value. So what you have to do to be successful here is to have thought through the contract, to have built a kind of straw person of the contract, to have modelled it through, to make sure that the social value commitments that you're going to make are tied to perhaps contract or framework spend. So you're not making commitments for, but not getting the equivalent spend from the social housing organisation. But for each maybe £100,000 or 1 million or whatever of spend, you are going to guarantee and then start giving your guarantees around apprenticeships, around jobs, around support for local organisations, etc. Don't forget your supply chain as well. Is it possible to have a supply chain that is as locally based as possible? I think that's one of the lessons that is perhaps going to come out of the COVID-19 situation, is that local supply chains, where things are not having to come from necessarily the other side of the world, but they're able to come in a local way. It might be that it makes it a little bit more expensive rather than maybe this just-in-time way that was being worked. But if you can really sell the benefits of localism as much as possible within your bids, you'll find that that will generally tend to resonate quite well with most social housing organisations. I'm going to now turn to customer care. Customer care is a very important part of successful bidding to social housing organisations. These organisations exist to not just provide housing for people, but to provide homes, to help to facilitate local communities that are enjoyable to live in, to work in, to rest in, to play in. And don't get me wrong, at times there's going to be problems in social housing areas, just as there are problems in other areas as well. But generally speaking, the organisations are very committed to giving as good an experience as possible for their residents. I remember when I was the manager of a local authority neighbourhood nuisance and antisocial behaviour unit, I think the percentage of antisocial tenants who were antisocial at any time over a 1 or 2 year period was something like 1% or 2%. It's a very, very small number. So most of the people in social housing are decent people. Yes, some people there will have certain vulnerabilities, but the social housing organisation is very much committed to making sure that they are looked after as well as possible by the suppliers and the contractors that are going in there. So where you've got people visiting residents within their homes, they would want to very clearly display their ID. So the ID should be clear. Sometimes it's better if it can be printed on both sides. So no matter which way the operative is wearing it, it can be seen, the photographic ID. More than that, of course, your staff that are visiting in people's homes need to be checked via the Disclosure and Barring Service. They would have to have a criminal records check. It's called Disclosure Scotland in Scotland, Disclosure and Barring Service in England and Wales. But definitely you would want to be able to provide assurance that your staff have been criminal record checked. In terms of the customer care levels, very, very important, particularly now in the COVID era. So things like welfare arrangements, it's not really acceptable for your operatives to be using the residents' toilets. So you might have to think about, well, what are the arrangements going to be? There's pretty good welfare vans around nowadays that can actually provide toilets, can provide cooking facilities, can provide a place for rest and breakout for staff as well. So it might be that you want to think about something like that. Even on the vehicles, though, you want to be thinking about sustainability as well, because that's an issue that is of great interest to social housing organisations. So is it possible that you could have electric vehicles or hybrid vehicles? Again, that is something that would play out very well. But back to customer care, what steps are you taking to deliver excellent customer care? Repairs are probably the thing that the social housing organisation will hear about the most when things go wrong. So, and of course, it can end up getting reported to board members of the housing association, elected members of the local authority for council housing. You know, they didn't fix my toilet seat or whatever, or I've been left with no heating. So all of these type of problems, the organisation wants to minimise or avoid as much as possible. So giving assurances around the service that you deliver. Do you operate an appointment system? Appointments generally are something that is looked for, particularly for a lot of the reactive and programmed repairs. How quick are your emergency response times as well? It's amazing actually, but social housing tenants generally benefit from an excellent level of repairs service and response times that are a lot better than maybe the private homeowner could necessarily get from a tradesman. They may just have to join the queue. But social housing organisations, because they're able to procure contracts at scale, you know, thousands of properties being covered, then the contractors that elect to do that are able to staff up accordingly as well. It's good to get access to historical data. You want to be in the same position potentially as the incumbent contractor or as close to that as possible. So you want to find out about numbers of repairs. If it's a repairs contract, you want to find out about the times that these come in, the months of the year that they come in, times of day, the volumes, etc. So that's very important when you're pricing up not just how much it costs to deliver the repair, taking a repair just on maybe a schedule of rates, but in terms of what you're going to need to actually deliver the service. For example, are you going to take all the repairs calls? Does the resident call you in the first instance, or do they call the housing organisation? What happens in an out of hours situation? What is the the data transfer arrangements? So they tend to have asset management software, and they'll often look for whatever job management software you have to be able to integrate successfully with their asset management software. Also, customer satisfaction you want to be thinking about as well. So how are you going to measure or monitor that? It used to be done with sort of status surveys where the tenant was given a form and they would have to, for quite a number of things, say, were they very satisfied? slightly satisfied, satisfied, slightly neither satisfied or dissatisfied, slightly dissatisfied or dissatisfied. Quite complicated. Didn't always tell a lot. Often they weren't returned, very low return rates. They were having to send them back through the post. Could be text messaging surveys that take place. It could be that the operatives have actually got handheld devices, and a bit like you see in the airport, maybe there's the smiley faces, or there's just no smile, or the down face, not happy. I know one contractor who their satisfaction is just to the tenant. They get a text: "Are you satisfied? Yes or no." Simple as that. You satisfied with the work that was done? Yes or no? To all the no's, they then contact them and try to move them towards satisfaction. Does something need to be tidied up? Does an operative need to be spoken to about their attitude or whatever? So how you handle complaints is very important, and obviously trying to minimise the complaints that reach the organisation or people going to the organisation in the first instance. It's better if it's obvious to the resident that they can come to you, they can get the complaint resolved quickly. You want to also evidence that you've learned lessons from complaints, and that you're an organisation that is learning, that is listening, and that is committed to continuous improvement as well. Increasingly, procurement is being used for delivering other things as well, like added value. So they're going to be looking for, what additional value can you provide? Maybe it's you might think of this as something for nothing. It's probably got to be a bit more nuanced than that, but you definitely want to be talking about any added value services that you could deliver. You would want to cost these up as well, so as it was obvious to the buyer what actual benefit that they were getting. Maybe it's going to be some kind of time saving or cost saving. With added value, and another thing you want to be thinking about is technology and innovation. Innovation and technology, things even like artificial intelligence, virtual reality, and some of this is going to come into maybe some of the professional services like architecture that are going to be needed within social housing as well, particularly for development or refurbishment projects. And how could you use something like virtual reality, maybe if you were at a tenants or residents meeting? Even just on the subject of meetings, are you able to run your meetings through video conferencing as well? Because that is of course very important in the current COVID era that we're within. It's good to think about the evaluation panel. Who is marking this bid? I did a LinkedIn broadcast earlier this week about who is marking your bid. And it would be well worth, getting the recording of that. But typically in a housing organisation, there's going to be somebody kind of on the commissioning side of things. There's going to be, if it's an asset management contract, somebody from asset management. If it's housing development, there'll be somebody from there. There might be somebody from strategy. There's maybe going to be somebody from the actual housing delivery, the tenancy management. There might be somebody from legal who sits on the evaluation panel. Certainly somebody from finance that is going to be on it as well. There, in many organisations, particularly housing associations, sometimes residents can get involved. It could be resident board members. It could be that they are involved perhaps in evaluating the arrangements for resident contact that there's going to be. It could be that some residents are on the interview panel as well. So you need to bear in mind that the bid could actually be getting salami sliced as well, and different people could be marking different questions. So don't assume because you've said something in one question, maybe you've shown this understanding of the organisation and its demographics and its local communities, and you think, well, I've said that once, I don't need to say it again. Don't assume that. If it's relevant to this question, then put it in there as well, because as mentioned, it could be that the bid is being read by different people. I would also recommend that you go or hang out where the social housing world goes. So where do they go? Well, they go to perhaps a website or a weekly magazine, Inside Housing. So you'll learn quite a lot about the housing world and Inside Housing. That's a publication by Ocean Media, and Ocean Media runs some very good events in the social housing world on the calendar. So the big one, Chartered Institute of Housing's conference in Manchester, usually takes place around June or July. There's a homes conference that focuses on development, refurbishment, asset management, and that has been in London, November time usually. I think these events are going virtual this year. Hopefully next year we'll get back to face-to-face events, but probably maybe and still have a combination of virtual as well to let more people than perhaps previously could attend these events. So I would definitely recommend that you keep in touch with the sector. And if you find, for example, that somebody in your client or target client is speaking at an event, then it would be good for you to go along and attend the event, if not in person at the moment, as we're doing, attending virtually, really getting to understand what is happening in their world, because the more you can evidence affinity with their organisation, the greater your chances are of success. You can even take this further. You can volunteer. You could perhaps go on the board of a housing association. They're often keen to get people with commercial experience. So it could be you're a legal firm or you're an accountancy firm or you're a professional services firm like surveyor or an architect, civil engineer. These sort of people would be very useful on the boards of housing associations. Now, that might mean that, for certain contracts, you'd have to declare it. There may be a conflict of interest, so you'd have to make sure that that was avoided. But do you know what? If you're a member of a housing association board and maybe for some reason you don't get to bid for that housing association's work, I would think it would be worth its weight in gold in terms of the experience of the sector and decision-making processes that could help you in lots of other bids to other similar organisations as well. So something to think about. Also, they're interested in people who have perhaps done volunteering, people who perhaps serve on the board of a charity. So again, the more affinity that you can show with the sector, that will definitely help you. I mentioned Grenfell, and it is vital that all of the procurement lessons are learned from that. So it's important that your organisation can demonstrate as well that you have that risk management approach and you are very, very careful around risk. So I can't stress that enough, and particularly on contracts, on fire safety contracts, energy efficiency contracts, maintenance of boilers, electrical contracts, vital that you have risk very much in mind and have appropriate measures in place to minimise, mitigate and eliminate, preferably, the risks. So I hope you found this run through bidding successfully to social housing organisations enjoyable and informative. Please get in touch with me with any questions that you have. As I say, I've got nearly 30 years experience around social housing, not to say as well the experience I had growing up living in social housing as well. So I'd love to hear from you. I'd love you to visit our website, the AMBid website, www.ambid.co.uk. You can contact me at andrew@ambid.co.uk. I'm continuing on with the LinkedIn Live broadcasting on Monday. I'm going to be broadcasting at 1 p.m. on Monday, and I'm going to be talking about the subject, why your bid needs a kickoff. So I look forward to seeing you perhaps on Monday.